get into the first topic, which is effluent, load restraint and chain of responsibility. So our first speaker is Jennifer Rattoli. She's the Manager of Codes and Practice at NHVR. So I will hand this over to you and the slide pointer. And I'll go and help Trish get the tech sorted.
Good morning, everyone. I've been given 5 minutes to talk about COR, effluent and load restraint. Not enough time, but of course the longer I talk, the less time there are for questions. So I'm going to keep it fairly brief. So I'll start just with a very quick summary of chain of responsibility. And I think you probably already know what it is, but it's a category of parties defined in our law, and it's those 10 parties there. So basically anyone that does anything to do with a heavy vehicle is going to be a party in the chain of responsibility, and that means that they have a duty called the primary duty to ensure the safety of their transport activities. A party could be a company, it could be an individual, it could be a partnership. Safety is ordinary safety, as we know, so preventing accidents, things like that. It also includes protecting road infrastructure, so not overloading vehicles, and it includes not damaging the environment. So, for example, effluent spillage is also a breach of the duty because it has that impact on the environment. And the thing that you have to focus on is the safety of your transport activities. I think there'll be a little bit of talk later on about the WHS duties. So you could think of the primary duty as the same as your WHS duty, except that the duty under the Heavy Vehicle National Law doesn't apply to your workplace. It applies to your impact on heavy vehicle transport. So to comply with the duty, you could think of it as two separate parts. The first part is managing your own use of heavy vehicles. So that's if you're driving or using heavy vehicles. And that's complying with parts of the Heavy Vehicle National Law that you're probably well aware of. So that's sticking to your mass limits, your dimension, making sure loads are safely restrained, vehicles are maintained, and you're travelling on safe routes at a safe speed. The other part of your duty is looking at how your conduct influences what other parties are doing. So this is where you're consigning goods or receiving goods, or you're managing premises where vehicles are loaded and unloaded. So these are the sort of things that you can do that influence the safety of the transport task. And it's things like not making requests or not entering into contracts that will cause drivers to breach the law. So not putting penalties for being late or incentives for being early. Providing accurate information. So when you get a vehicle to come and collect something or deliver something for you, you tell them accurately what the mass of that load is. Obviously being on time so that you're not creating delay that's going to affect the fatigue of a driver, 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 hours down the track. And having premises that are safe so that when drivers are loading or unloading that they're not exposed to risks. And of course, when we're talking about livestock, that there's an Australian standard now that ALATA's developed, which gives you that guidance about safe loading and unloading of livestock. You can provide facilities for drivers to be able to rest, and that's another thing that you can do which helps manage that fatigue risk. You can make sure that you're only working with safe operators, and that's one way that we exclude those unsafe people from the industry. And of course you can provide feedback to other parties about what things are working and what things aren't working. And generally speaking, communication between parties about expectations, about how things are going to be done, is one of the most important ways that risk can be managed. So that's COR in a nutshell, and I've just turned off the screen. To comply with your duty, we recommend that you take a risk management approach, and this is the same recommendation that is given for people to comply with work health and safety obligations. So think of your COR obligation as an extension, if you like, of your WHS obligation. So focus on identifying risks, assessing the risks, find reasonably practical ways to control those risks, and then incorporate those into the systems that you use. It sounds very good in theory, I know, and I'm sure a lot of your questions will be about how to actually do it in practice, but we'll see. NHVR also recommends using a safety management system. Now that's something that's prescribed in a lot of the other transport industries. So if you're in maritime or rail or aviation, there's a legal requirement to have a safety management system in place, and there's detailed definitions of what that safety management system is. There's no equivalent requirement under the heavy vehicle national law, but you can look at the NHVR's website for some recommendations about how you can implement a system like that yourself. It's called, I think, the 9 steps to SMS or something like that. And that's got information for people who don't have anything in place but want to start. And it's also got information for people who are on the way and for people who already have quite advanced safety management systems in place. I'm going to talk briefly about codes of practice. That's my main area. This slide is an extract from the law, and it explains the legal effect of a code of practice. I'm not going to go through all of the detail, but I just want everyone to understand that a code of practice isn't a document that tells you precisely what you have to do, and you don't all have to do exactly what's in a code of practice. A code of practice is information about risks and control methods for dealing with those risks. So the law treats the contents of a code of practice as information that people should know. So if you're a party in the chain of responsibility and there's a code of practice that's relevant to the activities that you do, familiarise yourself with the contents of the code of practice. You can adopt the recommendations in that code of practice if it's reasonably practicable in your circumstances. You can also find other ways to deal with the same risk that are equally effective as what's recommended in the code of practice. NHVR has recently changed its process for developing codes of practice. In the past, we asked industry groups to develop them and then we would register them or not. That hasn't worked so well. So we've issued new guidelines in February this year, which propose a different process. So NHVR will now collaborate directly with an industry group from the outset so that we can develop a code of practice from the ground up, working together. The first example of a code of practice developed like that is a Tasmanian Agricultural and Horticultural Code of Practice, also known as the SPUD Code, and that should be published on our website in the next couple of days. Meanwhile, the Master Code of Practice is still good guidance, and that's also available on our website. The Master Code applies to all of the heavy vehicle industry, so it's got excellent general guidance that will be reviewed over the next 12 months, but for now you should continue to refer to the Master Code. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about transition, because this is happening from the 1st of August. So all New South Wales compliance officers and people who deliver heavy vehicle services will, from the 1st of August, will be NHVR employees. Now, not a lot is going to change. There will still be the same people doing much the same work at the same locations. The main difference is they'll be wearing different uniforms. Their vehicles will look different, and there'll be different signs up at the 109 offices that you'd be familiar with. So your heavy vehicle inspections will still be taking place at the same place, at the same times, and I don't think there'll be any change to fees other than the normal increases. I think that's about all I had to say. About 340 staff will be transferring from TFNSW to NHVR. And that's what they'll look like. That's it from me. I'll look forward to answering your questions as we go forward.
Thanks, Jen. Excellent, thank you. All right, so following on from the high level code of practice stuff, now we're going to talk about the actual effluent one that's in process right now. So I'm going to introduce you to Susan Davies. She's the Project and Communications Officer for ALATA, who can tell you more about that. Here you go, Susan. Do that.
Good morning, everyone. As Mel said, my name's Susan, but you can call me Sue. Most people do. So I'll answer to Sue. I've been with the Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association for about 4 years now, and was employed to work on a couple of projects, one of which was developing the Code of Practice on Effluent Management in the Livestock Supply Chain, and the other was to look at developing infrastructure in effluent disposal and working on creating a network of effluent disposal facilities, and that's been very challenging. Okay, so when I was young, this is how livestock moved around, and where did the effluent go?
Well,
Everywhere. But now we have these modern livestock trailers, and they are built to meet the requirements of the road managers, and they have a limited capacity to have livestock effluent captured in belly tanks. So they might be 200 litres or 400 litres, but there's a limit. We've talked to the trailer manufacturers about what can be done to collect more effluent, because we realise that effluent loss is an issue, and they say that we've currently reached the limit of the capacity of being able to capture it in the current design of livestock trailers. So there we are. So the fundamental issues are that livestock generate effluent in transit and can lose up to 5% of their body weight. Animal preparation is something that our members, we've got about 700 members of Australian Livestock and Rural Transporters Association, and the majority of those are small business owner drivers, but there are some very large companies as well that are members of our association. But all of them talk about poor animal preparation and the need to curfew to limit how much effluent is generated. The livestock crates have to be ventilated. We're transporting live animals, and there are animal welfare standards that need to be met, specifically the land transport standards. Most states have, or all states have now got those into law. So if you're the person in charge of livestock, you have some legal obligations to meet. As I said, the trailer belly tanks have a limited capacity, and we don't have enough disposal points in transit to do that effectively. Our response is that the driver actually has little control over how much effluent is produced, and they have varying lengths of the journeys that they need to go on, so it's a difficult situation for them. We see managing the livestock effluent in transit as a shared responsibility of all the parties in the chain that Jennifer mentioned previously. Finding the drivers has little impact on changing how things are managed, but that's certainly the pointy end for us, where drivers get load restraint breaches when they're losing effluent onto the road. And as we pointed out before, there's a lack of investment in infrastructure to deal with the problem. Reasons to act. It can be a road safety issue. We've heard that there was a motorcyclist killed in New Zealand as a result of interacting with a spill on the road. So that hasn't happened here, and we're grateful for that, but we know it can be a road safety issue. Like any liquid on the road, any slippery surface can be a risk. animal welfare issues, downers in trailers, that sort of thing. If there's a build-up of livestock effluent within the crates themselves, that can be an issue. As you can see, not looking so great for the environment when there's some effluent on the roadside. Public amenity, people complain. I remember there was a small town in Queensland where they had diners al fresco, and there was a big right-hand turn onto the main street, and the public amenity was not great in that location. Biosecurity, increasingly we're hearing about biosecurity risks and any kind of live animal. It's not necessarily the animal, but insects and bacteria and other things that are around. So, you know, we need to be concerned about where this stuff lands. And the economics of the situation, you know, the livestock industry talks about integrity, it talks about safety, you know, and certainly in the last couple of years with some of the activism that's been around, there's a strong business case for having a clean and responsible and safe way of transporting livestock. So it makes good business sense to be seen to be doing the right thing. I have grandchildren and I saw this recently. So this is Bingo and they're on a road trip, and Bingo's counting cattle in the paddock, and then this truck goes past. And you can see what's happening out the back of the truck there. And that's the result. So the next thing they do is stop at the local servo, and then the grey nomads go past, and Bandit gets really upset about all of that. But anyway, I'm just saying this show is now sold internationally, and this is portrayed as a typical road trip in Australia. So a bit of a worry. So focusing on solutions, as Jennifer said, communicating what expectations are and talking to one another about how we can manage things. If producers can let us know where there are safe places to deposit livestock effluent that's been collected, if we can all share information about those places, the sale yards and other situations where that stuff can go, and just how animals have been prepared. Evidently, good quality dry feed as an alternative to keeping animals on pasture is one way of reducing how much effluent is produced in transit. We're looking for common sense enforcement and increasing roadside infrastructure, so we're lobbying for that. We've worked on a registered industry code of practice that's involved a lot of consultation with other stakeholders in the supply chain, and ongoing engagement with the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator as well to produce something that will fit the bill in terms of being an acceptable code of practice and something that can be produced as evidence in court proceedings. And we're also, members are participating in cooperative research that you can just quantify things about different animals and the effluent that they produce, and thinking about ways in which we can manage it better. So one of the things that happened was in 2017 there was some consultation with state jurisdictions and other interested people about effluent and load restraint, and the NTC then put out this report. And it talked about NHVR and the livestock transporters getting together to talk about small amounts of effluent loss and how we can manage that moving forward. And we've seen since that time there's been fewer infringements for just small amounts coming out the side of crates and that sort of thing, and it's more of an educational process rather than huge fines and that sort of thing. But you know, it's an ongoing issue, and it's not just the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator that can fine livestock transporters. The EPA, if people dump effluent at the side of the road, the environmental people have concerns about that, and they're large fines if you're discovered doing that. And of course, local councils are very concerned about the maintenance of their road sites as well when this sort of thing happens. Oops, did I go too fast? So we'd really like to see government support for building a network of stock effluent disposal sites as they have in New Zealand. And recently I was at a webinar where the Feedlotters Association were actually invited someone from New Zealand to talk about this. So they've developed, the regional councils have strategically placed these. They've developed local solutions for what to deal with the product, because actually livestock effluent can be used for fertiliser, and I think one of the places in New Zealand has a worm farm located not too far away, and they use it. Another one, there's a dairy, and they put the cheese waste or the whey or something with the livestock effluent to produce a very good fertiliser. So there can be a value attached to livestock effluent, and we really need to be looking at what we can use it for, rather than always considering it a problem and just wasting it. So one of the other projects that I was working on, as I said, was we received some funding to develop some disposal pits, and we've had success with Horsham, Mount Gambier and Warrnambool so far that have put in, they already have truck washers, but these are disposal pits where you can just drop and go, so that any transporter can go on their way, empty their belly tanks and then just head off. And as you can see, the one at Mount Gambier there, it's got lighting and it's got hoses so that they can just quickly wash down the grates and their plugs and stuff and then get on their way again. And the other thing that we're doing is we've still got some funding, and we're working towards a pilot roadside facility. Our members would really love to see what New Zealand has and just have those off-route and be able to dispose of the effluent and then just keep travelling along. So on major freight routes, strategically located, that's what we'd like to see moving forward. And we've been involved in an effluent code production, so we've consulted with stakeholders. We developed a working party. We've had several meetings. We identified what the risk was and have established a number of controls for different parties in the supply chain, and we're still working through that, and it's not too far away now. We're hoping we're going to have it out for public consultation in the next couple of months. And that's what I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. Final speaker for this panel session is Steve Lowe, the General Manager here at Forbes. Obviously there's a big livestock exchange here, so the local council perspective.
Thanks, Mel. I don't have PowerPoint, so I won't have death by PowerPoint this morning, but I think the information that's been provided to you already is pretty sensational stuff. There's money in shit, simple as that. So why would we waste it on the side of the road? And as Sue has just talked about, we're in collaboration with your organisation to look for one of those roadside dump points here in Forbes. Paul Porfer's been up a couple of times in consultation with our engineers, with Richard, and the northbound lane south of Forbes looks like it could be a possibility just outside our sewage treatment works. But it's a pretty serious thing for me, or for all of us in the room. Livestock is a major generator. And look, as we keep saying now with animal welfare, healthy animals are wealthy animals. So I just don't understand why the stock wouldn't be properly prepared and emptied out before they actually get back on the truck, whether they're coming to and from sale or whether they're coming straight off. I mean, a lot of these stock you see are coming straight off. So I was coming back from Dubbo on Monday evening and just showering, like Bluey, that you were just talking about just then, just got showered with it, and windscreen wiper was only just enough to, and I was looking to pull over to the side of the road. And it was a fairly modern crate. You know, I don't know whether the belly tanks are full or what the situation is, but the thing is too that at council we're constantly getting calls because some of the recalcitrant members, obviously not your members, Sue, I would say, they're probably cowboys and renegades, they pull up for a rest or for a wee or whatever they're doing, and they just drop their belly tank. And they drop it in the roadside rest areas. Then you've got you know, mums and dads pulling up in their caravan and they're paddling around in shit. And it's just not on. You know, and so the first thing most people start to do then is to denigrate the livestock industry because we can't get our act together to keep it going. And that's why, coming back to NHBR's position with the chain of responsibility, everybody knows that I've had a massive glue with the NHBR over the years about chain of responsibility and about interpretation, but I fundamentally agree with the premise of all of the people in the chain pulling their weight. And to do that, we have to make sure that we're policing each other and making sure that the stock that go on trucks are properly prepared, they're going to be able to enable the journey, the length of the journey that they take, and that they will get to the other end in the best condition they possibly can so that they're well presented for sale or for process. But the thing is, when we've got all of the do-gooders out there that are, you know, we've got all this fake meat out there now, and people are saying, why would we kill livestock when we can actually have something that's plant-based? Well, okay, that's one portion of an industry, but traditionally, we will still be using livestock for hundreds of years into the future, and we need to make sure we get it right. Our sale yards are there, 2 kilometres off the highway, and I've had this discussion with your members. I don't understand why truck drivers will not wheel in off the highway and come and use my sale yard. Cassie doesn't mind. They can drop their belly tanks there any time. There's no point in pulling up at the side of the road and dropping them in the environment. You know, people might say, oh look, it's only fertiliser, you know, whatever. But it's not the point. The point of it is that it's damaging, it's bad practice, and we offer the service for free to come and drop your load out there. Dubbo's just up the road a bit further there too, and there's plenty of sale yards around where there's truck washers. And we're looking forward to this pilot program, by the way, too, with the dump point, because I can remember going back many years ago when they first started. I think your members did a study tour to New Zealand and had a look. And Julie Savage was the leader of that group. Went and had a look at New Zealand. And yes, New Zealand's a much smaller country, and their centres are much closer together. Pastures are lusher, and you know there's all sorts of things going there. But you know, my opening line here about there's money in shit. We've got an organics operator now out at the industrial estate, out at Central West Industrial Park, called Topsoil Organics, who takes every organic thing that he can get his hands on, anything that's cellulose based. Next door to him, there's a brand new operator that's just been given $5 million from the federal government to set up a pelletising plant, and they're going to pelletise all of that product. The situation with effluent at Moxie Dairies, it's the biggest dairy in the southern hemisphere, milking 9,000 cows a day, 3 times a day. They are completely off grid now because they've got a methane digester out there where all of their cows are shedded, but all of their wash down goes into this big digester. They collect the methane and they're generating enough electricity and some to go into the grid. And so, you know, all of these things are good news stories, but I guess what the problem is that if the right hand's not talking to the left hand, sometimes we can't pull all of this integration together. So instead of dumping it on the side of the road, put it in a place where it can be accumulated and it can be used for future, for either pelletising into some form of organic fertiliser or being turned into some form of alternative energy. But my main interest from a council point of view, of course, is that we need to keep our roadsides in the manner that they're expected to be kept by people when they pull up, because we want visitation. We want our tourists to come to town. We don't want our tourists to be saying, well, gee, on their way to Forbes, you pull up at a roadside place there to have a cup of tea, and there's effluent everywhere. So Mel, I might leave it there at that. This is just an off-the-cuff remarks on my part. I'm happy to take as many questions as possible, but this is a pretty serious subject that Load Restraint about how you keep it on board. And I would just like to see, I don't know what you can do about bigger belly tanks. I mean, that's one of those things, but we certainly, I'm throwing open the challenge. Send your members up to the sale yards and tell them to drop their belly tanks up there.
On the traffic.
on the truck wash. Thanks, Cass. So don't forget Slido's up. So if you want to have a question, or you can do it the old school way and whack it in. Yeah. Do you want to do? Let's go with the top one. Chris, do you want the microphone?
Oh, do I need it? Probably not. It's different to seeing your kids up there, Mel. This is
Yeah,
good.
sorry about that.
What do I see is the problem areas and roadblocks. Roadblock being the operative word here. It's just the appetite for state government and federal government to actually get in and do the job. At the moment, you see the rail situation coming through, the double container staggered rail thing they're setting up. They're having trouble with that all the way through. Dual highway for New Line. What trouble would you have with the dual highway? I think you've got 5 or 6 river crossings. You've got the right of way all the way from the Victorian border all the way through to Queensland. There's only a couple of areas you need to actually to widen that area road up. A few towns you've got to go around. Probably one of them before. They're going to do that everywhere you go. If you look through the United States, they improved their road transport systems, and that came after World War II, by putting dual highways through the whole of America. Now they're rebuilding those at the moment, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. But that improved their system, it increased their population, it got their industrial might going again. Everything's good about what this is all about. As I said earlier, the middle of New South Wales is that West Wyalong through to Gilgandra area on the Newell Highway. That's the spine of transport. It's the 3rd busiest highway in Australia. So after they finish off all this stuff they're doing up Pacific Highway, come down and continue what you're doing down this way. Makes common sense to me, but anyway, it doesn't always work that way. So look, the industrial might that you can bring out of New South Wales, in the centre of New South Wales, be a major plus. It'll pay for that highway very quickly. There's also been, I can't remember the body that did this, they did it through toll and all those bigger companies. They would pay a toll from Victoria through to Queensland, and that would pay for that highway in 25 years. So there's a lot of things you can put into place here, but anyway, I'm sure everyone agrees. I could talk for hours on that.
Okay, who wants the next one? Industry is broadly after more improved rest stops for drivers. Could effluent handling also be integrated into these rest stops? Sue wants it.
Okay, this is something that we've been talking about for a while, and the Austroads Guide to designing heavy vehicle rest areas now has information in that about if you're building a new heavy vehicle rest area, consider, if you're on a livestock freight route, putting in a effluent disposal facility. So it's in the Austroad Guide, but what we need to do is get the road managers to implement the guidelines. So yeah, so every time we see things like, $80 million of funding for new heavy vehicle rest areas promised by the federal government, we're pretty keen to talk to road managers about putting in a well-designed livestock effluent facility, because I don't know that they have the same negative impact on other uses of the rest areas as what dumping in a rest area does.
That's good, Sue, thank you. I just throw out a challenge, and I do this on a regular basis to the NHPR and the other state-based transport organisations, in that we still have a massive deficit in rest areas. And as far as chain of responsibility is concerned, I said this to Sal Petrosetto before, that as far as I'm concerned, the NHPR should be leading the charge, and the National Transport Commission as well, in making sure that the funding is there. I think there was a figure that was given to me about 5 years ago that there's required 22,000 rest stops around Australia to make the whole job effective, so that transporters, when they pull up, they're not going to be excluded, because there's all different factions in the transport industry. There's the people who run fridge trucks, and it's not good adequate for those drivers to pull up next to other drivers, because the fridge van's keeping them awake. Stock as well, there's stock shuffling backwards and forwards on the trays of the trucks there, making noise, and also the smell from some of the stock trucks as well. So the deficiency in rest stops is a large contributor. It's not a local government issue, because we don't get the funding. I mean, Richard could talk about this for days. but the money that comes from the fuel excise and the money that comes from registrations doesn't flow on for us to build truck stops for drivers. So there needs to be a lot more of that. Our people are constantly out assisting our frontline emergency people at truck accidents. There's been some horrendous accidents that Michael and the rest of the crew have attended just south of Forbes here in recent times, and it's been through driver fatigue. And I'm a huge believer in the fatigue management situation needs to be assisted, but it also, I'll just throw that chain of responsibility back onto the authority, and the authorities need to be able to lobby the government and find the money to get it happening.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm listening. There has been some heavy vehicle safety initiative grants directed towards that, but obviously we don't have the funding to contribute to that. But what we can do, as you say, is to do that lobbying and that information share.
Questions from the floor? There you go. Oh, Trish, do you want to grab that other microphone? Can you tell us who you are and where you're from?
I'm Daniel Ball.
Oh, we know that.
Yeah, so
Everybody else.
I have a couple of trucks in town here, local transport, and we go all over the place. We've actually had this discussion a few years ago. The local council got a few of us operators together to talk about parking bays, and that was one of the biggest things that come up. And one of the suggestions Joe Glennon and I made was, we drive around and there's that many gravel dumps on the edge of the road, just even to the condo to Forbes Road and just not the main RMS roads, just the local roads. There's that many gravel dumps there that are already perfectly good to use, and they need like a garbage bin put there. If everyone cleans their trucks out somewhere, if there's a garbage bin there, they get cleaned out. There's that many places already to use. They just need a couple $100 worth of signs put up, so just to say there's a parking bay 500 metres ahead. And I don't know how many times I've been away, coming home, you're 30 k's from home, and you look at the bed and go, oh, I think I'm just going to have to give up here. And only last week, I was between Albert and Tullamore, and it's not far, it's probably 30 k's, and I couldn't make it. I just pulled up in the table drawer and went to bed. And about just on daylight, another truck pulled up, knocked on the door, said, "You're right, mate, you're in a funny spot." I said, "I couldn't stop anyway, couldn't stop." And it was only by sheer luck that we hadn't had rain for a bit that I didn't get stuck there. But if it was wet and you had to keep pushing on, that's when accidents happen. And there's no excuses. There's gravel parking bays, and at the moment at the Newell Highway here, there's 3 parking bays that are used up for the council, not council works, but the road workers there have got parking bays closed to park with their gear on to do the road works and all that. So, technically I think there's probably might be the 10 parking bays roughly between Forbes and West Wyalong. So there's 25% of them shut already. And so if an accident happens now for fatigue, does it come back to the driver's responsibility or for that parking bay being shut?
Yeah, that's all good stuff. Thanks for that, because the gravel dumps on the side of the road is something we are negotiating with the Crown because we're in trouble from council because we're not supposed to be using them. So there's another string to my bow that I can go to them and say, look, we can actually use this as a emergency parking. We just need to put, as you say, a garbage bin there so that they're not going to be littered or whatever. And as far as the other ones are concerned up the highway, you're 100% correct as well as with that, because they should be making alternative arrangements instead of just shutting them down.
Just something to add, NHVR is now using OpenStreetMaps for its route planner. And that's kind of like Wikipedia for maps. So anyone can log on to OpenStreetMaps, record information there, which can then be seen and used by any other person. There's a system where information is checked and verified before it goes into the the live map, so to speak. So if you do have information about here's a safe place that somebody can stop, by all means, enter that onto the OpenStreetMaps so that other drivers can use it. I'm not saying that's a total solution, of course. I'm just saying it's one little piece of the puzzle to help, with that fatigue management.
We have an app for our drivers to use to give their logs where the job's on, and I've got 5 drivers at this moment, and 3 of them can use the app, the other 3 refuse to because they play it in the phone. So So, I've got, the idea is great, but you can't beat a sign to say 500 metres ahead because you're not, otherwise we're going to be looking at the phone while trying to drive to find your next parking bay when you're tired.
Yeah.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
No, completely accept that. I suppose on the other hand, the advantage of an app is that it can be used to plan something. You don't know where that sign is until you see it.
Yeah,
If you're trying to plan ahead.
like our planning to get on the road, go, oh yeah, I might go here tonight, and then 10 minutes later you're tired and in bed. So it's hard to make the plan. The idea is great, but it just doesn't work, reality doesn't work like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Rod Hannafy, I don't know if you know him from Dubbo, works at Rod Gillian Transport. He was doing a trial of the 321 green reflectors for those informal rest areas.
Yeah.
I don't know where that's up to, but I am happy to check that out and feed that information back to you guys that are here. Wayne.
Thanks, Mel. Wayne Dunford from Going Green Net Parks. Just to comment on the effluent collection, I think there needs to be a heck of a lot of planning done on it because from our experience with trucks and tanks and that, in cattle that have been locked up, 200 to 300 k's, the tanks will be full. And there's nowhere to tip it. I've been with our own truck and another truck came into Forbes and he was running over. He said, I just can't afford to pull up and get caught dumping it, so it has to slop around and slush out and carry on. So my thoughts there are that, you know, Forbes side yards is central, but a lot of trucks that come there would not have an effluent problem because of the short distances they travel bringing stock to the yards. But then the ones that come from out west, which in the newer highways, your catchment for Dubbo, Forbes, Wagga, everything comes west, a lot comes from the western side. And distances, that's where your effluent problem is. I don't think there'd be much of an effluent problem from stock leaving the sale yards because they've had their curfews more times than they should have. And that's not an issue. Well, so I think, I know Queensland, I was involved in HBR, was starting to get into looking at what they could do because they'd have tanks they could store it in, then be carted away and all that sort of thing, and so there's big costs involved. So I don't think it's quite as simple as just putting a effluent drop point in most of the truck parking bays along the highway. That's probably not where the real issue is. I think it's further out, east and west, probably where they're coming to the major centres and doing trips to abattoirs and that to off-farm and that sort of thing. So I don't know what planning's been done, but I think there's something there that, you know, you've only got to get a map out and look at your main thoroughfares for your stock transport industry and see where the critical points are for those catchment because, you know, I think the limit is there because what you got, if the bigger the tank, the more weight you're carrying, so then all of a sudden somebody's going to knock you off for being overloaded. So it's a vicious circle. So I think, you know, it's simple, but it's not quite as simple as it sounds, probably as to where they should be. Thank you.
No, we all agree.
We're all agree.
Yeah, we certainly agree. And one of the things I'm looking at doing is there's a mob called Infrastructure Australia, and they develop a priority list for infrastructure projects. And I'm working on a case to work on getting national funding to develop a national network and to strategically locate on key freight routes livestock effluent disposal facilities, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Anything else from the floor?
I can have another comment.
You can have another comment.
All good points there, Wayne. The cultural change and the thought change is the big thing because what's expected, I suppose, is that you'll start your journey with empty belly tanks and that the effluent that transfers from inside the beast into the belly tank should make no net gain as far as the weight is concerned to the trucks carrying. It's not meant for the trucks to have multiple trips and then be storing all of the effluent for the day's work. So I think what Sue's people are doing to try and establish these dump points is also got to be in conjunction with the mindset that people can actually clear their truck each time to make sure that there is plenty of capacity to store what you can on board.
Got another Slido question. Are there surface upgrades required to use gravel dumps for parking bays, and if so, can councils apply for funds for these?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, there you go, yes. Any other question? Oh, up the back? Oh, I don't know where the microphone is.
Hi, Wayne Brosser from Harden. Just a question, I'm not 100% sure. Has the NHVRS got a cut-off point when you've got to have belly tanks on the trailers? Have they got a year model, or what's the story? Because there's a lot of early model crates running around that haven't got belly tanks on them. And what's the consequences?
Hi Wayne, there's no regulation or prescription about having a belly tank. In the draft code of practice that we're working on, having belly tanks is a recommended control. But as I was talking about before, because there's a recommended control in a code of practice, doesn't mean to say that you must have one. It's saying here's a recommended method, and the question is always whether you're doing what's reasonably practicable to address the risk. If you can deal with effluent in another way, then you don't need to install a belly tank. But obviously, belly tanks are best practice. The alternative is to somehow contain the effluent within the trailer itself, but as people have already commented, that creates that risk that the animals will slip over. So I'll probably have to say that belly tanks are accepted practice, particularly in urban areas or regional areas. I think if you're way out west or way up north, you might get away with it, but probably not on main freight routes and coastal towns.
Okay, last one, you're between us and morning tea, whoever it is.
I'll ask one question. I've got to leave after this one. To the shy man. Sorry. So, I'm at the Bujerabong Yarrabandy Road. It's taken 3 years to do our roads up. I'm just wondering, I've done engine mounts on my truck recently, and I just wonder why it takes you so long to do X amount. And little cars, we bottom them out, all these things are happening all the time. I'm just wondering, you're doing a lot of work out there now, which is great, but it just takes so long to do anything. That's my question.
I think you probably know the answer to that. It's all about funding. It's not about our will. If we had our way, we would have all our roads in pristine condition all the time. And it's just a matter of there's only much money to go around. And the priority for Yarrabandy Road, we thought it was a pretty big initiative for us to get in and get stuck in. I think we're doing 22 kilometres out there, aren't we, Richard? 15 kilometres, thank you. But look, I fully understand what you're saying. And with this last spate of wet weather, have you tried to drive down Eagles Road lately? I mean, there's some roads that are almost impassable, and the engineers have come up with some pretty radical design to put some heavy ballast that we've got stored in a quarry that's rock about that size, just to put some base in it, so that people can still get through, even though there'll be water over the roads, because getting the water to get off the roads is a big problem. But as far as why does it take so long, it's all to do with funding.
And I'd love to see more culverts out that way. It's all set up many years ago, and they're sort of sticking to the same plan.
Yeah.
And we get that much water out there, and if we're going to lift your roads up, we'd like to see it change a little bit.
What's your name again?
Len Brockman.
When we have these freight focus meetings, come along and talk to us. Talk about some of these spots that if we're doing the same thing wrong over and over, we need to get that right. You guys who are local, you know where your water runs, you know where it holds up and backs up. We need that information, because by the time we get around it a lot of times, our supervisors are out inspecting all the time and they're making notes, but then we come back to priorities and we look at what we think is going to be. The number one priority on all of our roads is safety as far as children are concerned, with school buses, getting people to and from work, and productivity, of course, is a high one as well. So we need to have all of those things considered, but there's only so many dollars we've got.
Yeah, fair enough. Just thinking of all...
But we need the information, we need your feedback.
I talk to the boys out there a bit, but anyway.
Righto, that wraps us up.